And Marcus, why don't we have you kick off with the intro?
We've got, so we just want to just double check. Somebody's actually raised their hand, but okay. All right, let's get started. The time's just come. So welcome everybody. And this is the next part or next installation of the HealthEngine Connect webinar series. My name's Marcus Tan. I'm the CEO and founder of HealthEngine, and I am very, very pleased to bring you our couple of co-presenters today in our Scale My Clinic founders, Dr. Sachin Patel and Dr. Todd Cameron. Many of you will know Todd and Sachin because they are prolific on social media and love doing videos and some very, very, very amazing videos at that. But they're seen to be the go-to teachers for general practice owners who want a dream team and a high-performing practice. Their signature systems are built around strategic thinking for focus, recruiting and retaining the right team and leading them to high performance. Now, obviously, the COVID vaccine rollout that's coming has created quite a lot of interest in this particular webinar. We've got almost 350 people registered for this particular webinar. And we want to just ensure that you've got access to the latest thinking on delivery models for consideration for your clinic, and knowing that there's a lot of change in the environment and also lots of information that isn't quite complete. Having spoken to Sachin and Todd, they've developed a way of thinking about the COVID vaccine delivery that's been built up over about 250 hours of thinking. And I think their wisdom will be something that you'll get a great deal of value from. So what I will do is ask everybody to put stuff into the Q&A section of this particular webinar platform, and we'll try and address them as much as we can throughout the session as it makes sense, or right at the end. So without ado, given that there's so much to cover, I'd like to throw it over to Todd and Sachin. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcus. It's a great privilege to be able to present to your audience, and thank you for your service to the field of general practice over so many years. Hey, I have a question. Is the chat enabled? Can people use the chat, or is it Q&A only?
No, I think it's only Q&A only
okay,
at this stage. Yeah, yeah.
No worries. Would it be okay if I get people to actually put some stuff in there that might not be specifically questions and answers? Just might be useful for you later on to get a bit of feedback. We really like to get people engaged just to find
absolutely. Comments are welcome as well.
I just want to make sure I don't actually get people to spam something that later on we think we shouldn't have done that. I just wanted to say thank you at the first part about the opportunity to present before you all. As Marcus talked about, Sachin and I reckon we've knocked out 250 hours or so on this. And a lot of that work has been done with our colleagues in the UK, of course, because they've gone first. And so it's always good to take feedback from those that have been there before you. And we've probably spent about 10 hours in webinars coaching our members, and we're distilling all of that to a 1 hour overview. So of course, you'd expect that it lacks the depth that you might otherwise get, but we want to touch on the high points that mean that you're not enthusiastically running in completely the wrong direction. And I am concerned about some of the approaches that I see people kind of touting as the approach they're going to use. And so we're going to walk through some of the areas where there are common mistakes that we see people making. I guess one thing that I wanted to touch on first of all was, does anybody here see a need for a bio from Sachin or I? Are you comfortable that we are appropriate to proceed from here? And if there are no hands up or any ways of communicating there, then that's fine. So what we're talking about today is the models that we have worked on with our members, and also with people that are in the broader audience of practice owners that don't necessarily work with us. But if you know our work, you know that we share it pretty widely. And that's what we want to talk about today. So really, really important to remember here that not everything that you plan works out as you expect. And so you are going to need to make sure that you have the right audience so that you can move back and recalibrate exactly how you've performed. Mike Tyson has a much simpler version of this, which is everybody has a plan until I punch them in the mouth. And that's the truth about what the COVID vaccine clinics are going to be like. And I also want to give you permission that at the end of this session, you may determine that your clinic is not the right clinic to be doing the COVID vaccines. And I think that's an intelligent strategic decision. Certainly some of our members have taken that decision, and that would put them at a tactical advantage over clinics that have said yes and clearly should not have said yes. And I reckon that's the majority of practices that you and I have spoken to, Sachin, about this. So let's keep moving. Now, in terms of staying calibrated to what's going on in the environment, I would like you, if you can, to just take a screen grab of that. That QR code will take you to a free Facebook group that Sachin and I have put together. And as we talked about, you are going to find that you're going to need to recalibrate on some of these models, depending on what your local environment, what your local ecology is, your resources, etc. And so if you want a place that is a safe place that you can talk to other practice owners, then this is it. Those of you that are practice managers here, please invite your practice owners to join. I just want to say something to you too, that we don't let many people in. So more people are rejected than are allowed in. There are 3 questions to get in. You need to answer all 3 to get in. If you can't demonstrate to us that you're an owner and we can't verify it, then you won't be allowed in. And aspiring owners, there are some there, but they need to give us a good reason as to why that's the case. So feel free to jump in there and we'll make sure you get another look at that later on. Before we get going, I'm going to ask you a question, and without the chat, you might put this in the Q&A, but my question to you is, what does success look like for you in COVID vaccine delivery? What will it mean? And when we've asked this question before, we often find that people say, well, my first objective is not to burn out my team. I don't want to go overwhelming people. I don't want to, at the end of this, have 1, 2 less GPs or some key staff members that leave. Probably nurses are a particularly high risk. And so we want to make sure that at first we protect our downside. We don't end up in a circumstance where we are disadvantaging our practice. And then the upside needs to be that we make a profit. Again, I have heard a lot of altruism from practices saying, well, this is a community service and, we don't really need to make a profit out of it. This may sound inappropriate, and I am a GP and a practice owner, but I am a business coach. If you do not have line of sight to making a profit on this, then you should not do it. Pretty simple, because the reality is, if you think you're going to break even, you're probably more optimistic than you ought to be. And if you're doing this and you're making a loss, then it is a genuine public service, and you may as well go and do that through the proper vehicle, which is not anything that is in your name, where you're paying the taxes. Now, I'm going to get a little bit of feedback from you in the Q&A, and my question here is, who are the groups that you have looked at to give you guidance in running successful COVID vaccine clinics? And I don't mean anything about the clinical guidance. I mean, who has given you some useful models around how you can run a profitable, reliable, slick COVID vaccination clinic? Whereabouts are you going for that information? If you can drop that into the Q&A there. You guys is one of the answers. Okay, that's useful. If you are relying on your peak bodies, your representative organisations, whether they're either of the colleges or the AMA, I'm really keen to get a score out of 10 as to how they're actually going in assisting you with coming to a model that makes a lot of sense. Because it seems like there's still a lot of confusion around this. Adelaide PHN, that's good. It's good to see a PHN in there, actually, providing some good guidance here. Okay, good, cool, that's really useful. Thank you. All right, let's get to doing a little bit of a walkthrough of the actual session. So you may be concerned when you're thinking about COVID vaccination clinics that you have a lack of capacity. And it's quite a reasonable concern. And not only may you lack capacity in your practice, but you may lack personal capacity, which just means you may be concerned about this being more difficult than anything else that you would be doing. And frankly, it could distract you from doing your normal work. And in many cases, this will be a very, very big issue. And the worst possible outcome is that you actually take on reputational damage by the way that it's delivered or not delivered. And we all know, at the moment, the federal government is a bit of well, I'm going to say, without swearing, it's on fire, the federal government, and they seem to not be worrying that much about what's going inwards, but they still find the time to crucify a doctor that delivered a harmless extra dose of the Pfizer vaccine, but within the day that doctor had been reported to APRA and stood down. Meanwhile, what's happening in the head office at Parliament didn't seem to be such an issue. So reputational damage is a very real risk here, and I imagine a concern for all of us. So our mission today is to work with you to create options to actually grow your reputation and to make sure that you can reliably expect a financial return from these models and to make a big impact in your community, which is ultimately the way that all of us had when we set out to start our own general practices. So what I want to talk to you about here is the model that we use to discuss the way that we address the question around coaching general practices businesses. So Sachin and I determined that there was a gap in the marketplace, that there weren't people coaching general practices from a business perspective that had the lived experience. There are plenty of people that seem to talk about it from a perspective of practice management or maybe accounting, some other background that just lacked a connection to the reality of what happens at the coalface. And we determined that the main reason that we wanted to address this was that when you look at this iceberg of the business of general practice, the bit on top above the water gets pounded by a lot of things. You know, you've got MBS freezers for the last 8 or 9 years. I can't see that unfreezing anytime soon. You've got, you know, the increase in MBS audit activity. You've got the stuff like the telehealth stuff that came out more recently, you know, where the federal government says, help us out, do telehealth. And then within 9 months, they're saying, can we have some of that money back? And the new approach is to say, we think you're guilty. Can you prove you're not? You know, I'm not sure how you feel about that, but I'm interested to get some feedback in the Q&A there. Then the challenge is there's a lot of stuff that pounds the top of this iceberg, but we know the things that really determine the direction of the iceberg. And the 3 things that that we work on delivering at Scale My Clinic are 100% business generated income. And even if you can't get to 100% of your income being business income, and you'll notice it doesn't say passive income, a higher percentage of business-related income is ideal because it means that you can work and your what you take home from your consulting, your personal exertion can be your lifestyle that funds everything that you do, and your business income can fund a wealth-generating machine so as that in time, it actually is replaced by other things. We know that the things that owners most seek is to have freedom over their time. And, you know, this is the paradox of opening a practice or running any business for that matter. We usually start it for reasons of freedom, but in fact, what we get at the start is the exact opposite. And we know that in order for you to get complete choice over your time when you work, and now with telehealth, where you work from potentially, you're going to need to have an independent dream team. And so this area is often one that is overlooked substantially. And one of the things that we know that people deserve in their general practice, we truly believe that owners deserve success in heart, mind, and wallet. The heart being the intellect, being the pride, the mind being the intellect, and the wallet being the bit that many practices miss out on. At the end of the day, you can't take heart and mind down to Coles, Woolworths or Bunnings. You do need the cash at the end of it. So it's really important that we have that right at the center of everything that we do. And we look at a model that we use to describe like a Maslow's hierarchy really of business ownership. But you can see here down the bottom, most of us, when we start our own practice, it's the nightmare job. And the funny thing is that when we're talking about nightmare jobs, you know, the entrepreneur is the only person that will go and work for themselves for half the money, working twice as much, just so they don't have to do it for somebody else. And down here, you know, our mantra is to do it right, DIY. If I want it done, it's got to be done by me. And then we find that we have to cross this line called the fear and ignorance line. And in order to cross that line, that requires a mind shift, and that is that I am the bottleneck. And you can see down the bottom here, there is In terms of automatic income, there is no business income. It all relates to your personal exertion. There is no dream team. It's completely dependent on you as the owner. In fact, if you're not there, there's a fair chance it's closed and you have no choice over your time. But you'll be happy to know there are layers to ascend through, and eventually we make our way up to the well-paid job, which means that we're probably getting paid a higher return for our work in the practice, consulting than what we would in the open marketplace, but usually means we're being underpaid for the work we're doing on the business rather than in the business, with that owner hat on. The layer above there at the real business layer is where you start to get meaningful business generated income, and you do have some choice over your team. You'll notice here you can be much more selective about your environment, whereas below there it's a much more opportunistic approach. And when you get to the real business layer, we find that many practices pause here. They look around, they see their mates that they're in the well-paid job and the not paid job layer and go, you know what, I'm doing okay. I don't think I need to worry too much about this. But there is another line here, and that is all around being good enough. And this would be like Apple on the bottom side saying, you know what, we've done the iPod, we've revolutionized music. That plus iTunes is pretty cool. Let's forget about it, and we'll have a really successful business. Instead, they went on to develop iPhones, iPads, so on and so forth. And so they understood that the myth that okay is good enough is the way that you escape that layer is to get that complacency traps you. There are always layers above, and it is only in this asset layer that you truly get to thrive and achieve these outcomes that we talked about earlier. Now, in this next part, what we would ordinarily do is do some traffic lighting, because I'm going to walk you through the way that we approach the business success blueprint. That is a model that we've used many times over, and this model is really a bit of a roadmap to make sure that you don't leave any gaps in what you're doing, and that you are able to move more quickly in doing the work that you need to do in your practice, and identifying the areas where there are shortfalls. And when we do this in live events, we get people to score the accelerators you'll see around the outside. I'll walk you through a few of those in a moment. We know that most people tend to calibrate towards orange, somewhere in the middle, with a couple of green and often a couple of red in there as well. So that model looks like this, and you can see that at the center of this model, there is success in heart, mind, and wallet. That's important. And then the areas that we just talked a bit about, these what we call petals, automatic income, complete choice over time. And in order to deliver that, you are going to need the dream team. As Marcus alluded to earlier, we have three areas that we call levers that we know are really important for success in general practice. Strategy needs to move from unfocused to focused. Recruiting needs to move from accidental to deliberate. And you're going to need to be doing a lot of recruiting to deliver on your promise with the COVID vaccination clinics. Leadership needs to move from participation to performance. And we know these areas are really, really important for success. And you can't ignore any of them, because if you have strategy and recruiting and no leadership, well, then you lack direction. If you have recruiting and leadership without strategy, then again, you are somewhat rudderless. Rather, when you have strategy and leadership and no recruiting, you have no business. You're just the only person there. You can never grow it, and that's not particularly useful. And if you have strategy and leadership but no recruiting, you're going to struggle. You're going to need to have all three of those areas in order to succeed in the way that you deliver on the promise of better care. Who knows who this guy is? Get some feedback in the Q&A there. If you said Dr. Roger Bannister, you'd be right. So Roger Bannister did become a neurologist after he was a successful runner. He broke the 4-minute mile back on the 6th of May in 1954. And then within 3 weeks, John Landy, Australian John Landy, also broke the 4-minute mile, and some 1,500 odd people have since done that. The reason that's important is because the main reason people didn't run the 4-minute mile prior to that wasn't related to fitness. and wasn't necessarily related to training, but it was related to possibility. People weren't aware that it was possible. And so with your permission, I'd like to share a few stories about some of the members that we've worked with in the past 12 months and the successes they've had, just for context about what's possible for you in your practice. They have your permission to do that, and obviously de-identified conversations or details rather. The first one I want to share with you is a multi-clinic owner with a multi-million-dollar profit was able to grow their EBITDA. That's just a sort of normalized measure of profit, if you like, by 84% in the last 12 months. And that sounds pretty impressive. And that's adjusted for any COVID stimulus and added practices, etc. And whilst the extra money is pretty cool, the banks actually said to this member, whatever you're doing, we love it. Please keep it up. The second one I wanted to talk to you about was a member who, after owning a business for just under 5 years and continue to sort of bounce off a revenue ceiling of around about 2.5 mil, managed to increase revenue by 81% in 1 year. And again, that sounds awesome, growing revenue by almost doubling a business that had been around for a while. And you know, you can imagine what that did for profit. But the thing that was most impressive with that owner was what it did with their mindset. They said that for the first time, they've had financial buffers. They've been able to invest time in strategic thinking and start bolstering their team with the people that they needed, which was really the biggest gain. The last one I want to share with you is a small to medium-sized clinic owner who was able to turn around an unreliably profitable business, is what I'm going to call it. And I think most of us can relate to this, that we have businesses that just don't sort of reliably do the work that we project that they will do. And what they've been able to do is turn around so that not just reliable profit, we're talking a cash-based profit that every month in, month out, there is 6 to 8 grand that shows up in their bank account that previously was not there. And as well as that, they've been able to make a massive dent in the acquisition costs that had that were really relevant to them having their practice. So let's get to the area that we're going to be focusing on in the COVID vaccinations. The strategy lever is really the main one that we're working on here, and income sources. I'm just going to describe to you what we mean by this. To create a truly resilient practice, you absolutely must identify and prioritize consulting and non-consulting income sources to build revenue diversity. And the COVID vaccination clinics do present a great opportunity to provide revenue diversity. Risk management. To safely grow your practice, you should implement structured risk management frameworks that protects you and your assets during high speed growth. How comprehensively are you managing business risks when you are focused on growth? And this is going to be really, really critical in delivering on high volume vaccine clinics. Seamless delivery. To deliver disproportionate growth without a bigger payroll, you must deploy proven tech solutions for operational leverage. How easily and friction-free could you manage a large influx of patients? That's highly relevant to what's going on now. And ordinarily, we would also look at how this impacts you in the future. I just want to let you know that whilst we've done a lot of work on COVID vaccination, and we might be perceived as the COVID vaccination guys from a business perspective, it is a very small portion of what we do overall, less than 5%. And this pie chart represents all of the other areas of coaching that we do. I'm going to briefly talk to you about Project X, which is where we do coach our members, and then get to a detailed run through of what we're talking about at the moment. So Project X is a members only group coaching audience, if you like, that Sachin and I serve. The way that we serve them, we won't go into detail about today, but I do want to talk to you about who we work with and who we don't work with, because that's just important to know where our focus comes from. Who we do work with is privately held practices, less than 3 owners. More than that tends to be difficulty with alignment. They are action-oriented, they're coachable, and they can invest 2 hours per week or more in improvement. Who we don't work with corporates. More than 3 owners is generally difficult, and people need to confirm with us that they are actually aligned, and dysfunctional teams. So Now, I want to get to the workbook that's here and make sure that you have that available. I just want to check that everybody has the workbook with them. I can get a couple of yeses in the Q&A. That would be really useful. Now, the first thing is that there are really three groups of people that are your audience for COVID vaccination. The
Hey,
yes,
Todd.
no, and maybe. Yep.
Todd, just one note. The workbook is something that is shared out afterwards.
So I think Kath dropped it up the top.
Oh, okay. Thank
So
you.
actually, no. The workbook, Kath, can I get you to drop that in there? That'll be really useful. It should show up in the Q&A.
We'll just drop now, Dr. Cameron.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so while the team's doing that, and you can grab the workbook, that's going to be really useful just for following what's going on here. So there are three groups: the yes, no, and maybe. And what we're seeing is that we tend to, as clinicians, have a bias towards the red light, the no's, and because most of the time when we've got people that are kind of declining vaccines, it's in the context of child immunizations. That's usually the way that we are addressing this. The problem is in this circumstance, these are individuals that are denying the vaccine for themselves. So the messaging here needs to be really clear that you are not going to address these people. You want them, all of your public messaging needs to say, if they're determined they're not going to have it, that's fine for their own reasons. Please keep abreast of all of the government information. And if they decide they want to opt back in, then you're ready to immunize them at the time. That's going to be really critical. The next group is the green group, and green here means not just people who want to receive the vaccine and consent to receive the vaccine, but people who can use the tech stack that you will be, obviously, as members of HealthEngine, you'll have access to the tech stack, but the tech stack is designed to reduce friction. You've got a capped amount that you can charge per encounter. It's really, really important that wherever possible, as I talked about in seamless delivery, you push people to a tech solution. So green means that they agree to have it, they consent to receive it, and they can use the tech stack. Anybody else is orange, and all of your attention needs to be to the orange audience, because this is where, in our opinion, you need to be doing consults prior to the high volume clinic. If you are going to do something that is high volume, you must have low variability. I just want to be really clear on that. If you determine that you're going to do the orange work in the COVID vaccination clinic, which is frankly how the federal government's kind of implied you should do it, the reality is these consultations should be held with the patient's usual GP, who may speak their language, but most definitely knows their medical history well. All of those patients that are uncertain, or they have some of the areas that come up in the vaccine training, they're on anticoagulants, they're immunocompromised, or they've had reactions to anything in the past, anaphylaxis for any reason in the past. Those patients really should be having those consultations at a time that is not part of the vaccine clinic, and there is no reason why you can't do that. The only time you can have people in your vaccine clinic is when you have the vaccine ready and able to be given. That is a key part of the silly named. I'm not quite sure what the federal government thought they were doing, but they're actually not a they're not something that is appropriately to be doing in that particular session. What I'm suggesting here is that all of those consults occur beforehand, and you've got a good mechanism for actually picking up that those people have had discussions, they've consented, and they've been put into the high volume clinic, just so that you know that can actually do the job that it's designed to do. And the vaccine suitability assessments, as the federal government determine these, are really more about making sure that you can move quickly in that time. And Kat's got the workbook in there, so you should be able to see that. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this in much detail, but this is the workflow that we're working on with our members to make sure that they're using to actually push people out to either a telehealth if they've been a patient of the clinic and been face-to-face consult in the prior 12 months. If not, then obviously it requires a face-to-face consult. But to have a consult that's specifically geared around the needs of discussing COVID vaccination and basically making sure all of their questions are addressed prior to the time they get to that clinic. So if you want that, then that's something you can get a hold of later on. And I'm going to get you to open the page where you have these 4 boxes up. And I'm just going to get you to write down, this is the way that we've actually done our COVID vaccine comms. And there are 6 boxes here. The first one is now to arrival. And I just want to give people a bit of a context here about where the people that we have been working with are up to. So they began this work in January. One of our members literally read out our comm stack. They had it on one screen and they had their camera with the nasal hair view. He just read out the whole stack that we'd put in place, uploaded it onto Facebook, and this in a rural setting had 5,000 views within a couple of days. It had been shared sort of 40 times. And so it's really, really important to get this message out in a timely manner. So now to arrival, vaccine approval. And these first 2 stages obviously have passed, but you might still want to put some content out to them. And then there's now to rollout. And then the next one is rollout to selected groups. Then there's delivery. And then there's the second dose. So you need to make sure that you cover off on all of these areas in the work that you're doing. And so you'll know that the advice around how do you eat an elephant is do it 1 bite at a time. And so you are going to need to chunk it down, and you have got some frameworks that you can use in the workbook that I'm not going to go through right now, but those frameworks will give you the structure for each of those blocks as to how you may actually deliver those comms. Let's clear some paper out of my way. You're going to need to be comfortable with getting on stage. This is going to be really important because there is probably no better way of communicating this than video. And if people wanted the boring documentation, then they already have that from the federal government. So you're going to need to be comfortable getting yourself out in front of your audience. And again, you are going to need to add personality and make it yours, because the way that you communicate, the reason your patients choose you is because they like the way that you communicate. So it makes sense that they also want to hear the messages from them as well. And there is a question here, can we get the nurses to call them on the phone, see them in person? You're probably better off to actually, I would have thought, use the comms stack wherever you can for this. So you're directing people to the right appointment types, because once you start adding phone calls to this, so, you know, it would be quite reasonable that in your COVID vaccination clinics, you could see as many patients based on the model that we're going to talk about in a moment. You might see in a 5-hour slot, something like a half, a quarter, sometimes the full amount of patients that you would have seen in the week prior may be done in a 5-hour slot. So you don't want a lot of phone calls being generated from that. And one thing I would suggest to you is that anytime you do some comms around COVID, you should put a small bit of text or also words before the video that says, please don't call a practice about this, because if you track your phone call volumes, you'll find they're already rising because people are calling. So people are really dead keen to get this information. And the number of times you need to communicate with your audience before a message sticks, in most cases, is seven times. That's right, 7 times. So don't be afraid to get out there and do lots of communicating. And you should copy the military, which means use multiple channels here. And Sachin and I often have a bit of a joke and say, whilst this looks like the military, this could quite easily be the federal government sitting around and just taking notes about new ways to take advantage of general practice. I'm going to ask you how enthusiastic you are about the documentation you see here, the 4-page consent document, the ridiculously named MBS vaccine suitability assessment, and the COVID training. I'm going to get you to give me a 1 word in the question and answer tab there about what your thoughts are about that. It's not particularly spectacular, is it? And you are going to need to start ASAP. So, you know, this is like the question, when's the best time to plant a tree? The best time is 20 years ago. In this case, the best time was January or December to start talking about it. But the second best time is now. And so let's get going with what we can do right now. Don't forget the second dose. And again, we think people are making some errors of judgment here. Booking an appointment 12 weeks in advance for anything. And the main time we would do that would be CDM, care planning. It doesn't have a really high turn-up rate. We don't find that that's awesome. And so you just need to be mindful of the fact that you've got to have a really good strategy about how you deliver on the second dose. And we have got some information that we'll share with you later on about that. All right, last little bit from me, and then we'll hand off to Sachin. You do need to go through the comms summary deck that we've put in the workbook there. There is a lot of really useful information and a guide to how to craft your comms. Make sure that whenever you're linking to the formal government documentation, double check those links. And then make sure that you give people one call to action, that there's ideally one thing they do with every bit of communication, even if it's just simply an update. That's the main thing. We have got a list that we've put together of a whole bunch of stuff you're going to need to be able to run a high volume COVID vaccination clinic. Some of it you're not going to need at the end of this, whenever that is. You know, originally it was October. It's probably more like January, February. I would suggest. And so it makes sense that some things you may actually borrow. You may buy some things with the idea that you'll give them off at the end or potentially repurpose. And we have got a list of those. I'm going to share with you in a moment where you can get that. Again, because we've spent so much time on this, it just means that you can be a bit lazy with your thinking and not worry too much about it. So that's fine. You are going to need to have some really good strategies to select priority groups. I have seen some stuff that really worries me here, where people are kind of wanting people to, fill in stat decks that they're in the right group. The truth here is that our mission is to immunise all of Australians above the age of 18, and they all get the same vaccine. And there is zero community transmission at the moment, Australia-wide. And if it isn't zero, it's pretty close to zero. So what that says is there is no difference in what you get access to, and there are not groups that are exposed and vulnerable because we have very low or zero community transmission. And so if you end up doing a few people earlier than what they would otherwise be done, it's not a disaster. I wouldn't get completely caught up about it, and I certainly would not be obsessively trying to keep people out of practices. Based on work we've done before, most people tend to obey the rules. It's pretty rare that you get people that kind of jump in when they shouldn't. And I think our response to COVID showed us that Australians are actually pretty good with this stuff. You are going to need to fill in the gaps. So if you've allocated 300 appointments in one session, then you're going to need to make sure that you have a way of actually filling up in case that hasn't risen to capacity, because all of your costs will already been accounted for. So you need some strategies to do that. The devil is in the detail. We've built a lot of this work, Sachin, and I think that there has never been a more detailed piece of work, because every single piece needs to link to all the right documentation, needs to link to the right appointment types. There are a lot of moving pieces with this, and it is definitely not a modified flu vaccine clinic. That is the number one thing that I want you to take away from this. If you think we did a good flu clinic last year, we're just going to do the same thing, that's probably a failure path. And as I said earlier, we have had a lot of people that are enthusiastically running in the wrong direction. And so here, I want you to have a look, and you can take a screen grab of that if you like, or you can use your QR code. That is a page that we've put up where there is some more information with a lot of checklists that you can use to reliably know that you have done the things that you're supposed to do and identify any gaps in what you're going to need to deliver high volume COVID vaccination clinics. I'm just going to leave it up there a bit, or you can use the bit.ly link, which is just bit.ly /COVax 2021. That will take you to the same page. If you go on there, you'll see that there is a checklist that you can download. I'll move that on. The other thing you're going to need to keep in mind is that you do need to let people know that they ideally report any side effects, because this is a new vaccine. And if you've done the vaccine training, you'll know that's Ausvax in most cases, but you can also use SmartVax. This is a service set up by a fabulous GP, Dr. Alan Lieb, and either of those will suffice for reporting afterwards you're going to need to make sure you build that into your automations. That's going to be really, really important. Anybody who knows me knows that I will stick a photo of the Richmond Football Club in any slide deck if I can. We know that HR and getting some increased human power is going to be critical to running these really well. By our estimation, in most practices, it's an uplift of 30 or 40% increase on the work, and it's probably going to be for 9 or 10 months, potentially up to 12 months. That is a recipe for burnout if you do not have roles that can be filled by people that are not currently part of your team. And there's an HR stack that is available that we can make available to people later on if they would like that. That just includes position descriptions, etc., for those people. And certainly we've modeled, our financial models include people at pretty ambitious rates, because the other problem you're going to find is that the buying price, the rate is bid up by what's happening in the marketplace at the moment. And so we do need to consider how we do this. And as owners, I strongly encourage you not to just go out and smash yourselves doing a lot of extra hours, because the reality is you'll be neglecting your main business and your clinic will probably fall to the wayside, which is one reason that we've said to people, you know what, if you tactically decline to get involved, you can probably pick up a lot of people that are burnt out from other practices. So make sure that you actually make the right choice here. And at that point in time, I'm going to hand off to you, Sachin. So I'll stop my screen share.
Cheers, Todd. Excellent. Let's have some fun. So we'll get our crayons out and do some drawing first, and then we'll go into the models. Hopefully you can see my screen well here. If you can't, I'll have a different mode of sharing that I can turn to. So what we know is that we want the big green tick of success, whatever success is for you here. And there's 3 pieces that you need to do while thinking around your models. First of all, we need to make sure that the process we choose is safe. Okay, so of course, safety is paramount. Next, we need to make sure that we can do it fast and with a volume, a significant volume. And finally, it needs to be financially viable. Okay, and it needs to break even. I'm very keen in the questions and answers to hear what your definition of break even is. So if you can put in the chat, in the question and answer, what your definition of break even is, that would be wonderful. I'm going to share mine while you're doing that. Our definition of break even is your cost plus 50%. So that is the floor of where we want our modeling to result in terms of the financial side. So one thing we normally say when we have these conversations with you is that we fully appreciate clinical excellence. So, but I don't coach about that. We coach about business excellence. So our assumption is that you're all over the clinical excellence. So we're going to take the clinical excellence hat off, put the business excellence hat on, and our break even is cost plus 50%. Is that clear? Just put a yes for me in the question and answer if that's clear to you. Excellent. Okay, so now there's a big conversation to have before we unveil the models. And that conversation goes a little bit like this. There is an opportunity cost that could come with pursuing the vaccine if your team are not on board and if you haven't planned correctly in this way around making sure that you've eliminated the downside, the risk. If you can eliminate the risk, then you can partake in the vaccination process. You can still have a system where you can opt out if it's not for you once you've actually engaged in the process, but it's not putting the rest of your business at risk. If we make the wrong decisions, we could easily lose team members, including doctors, including nurses, including admin, because we haven't made the right decision. So we must involve our team in this whole process, and can't overemphasize that enough. No great things were achieved alone. So let's go back to the slides. Now, I'm going to talk about a few models. However, we've got detailed videos of those in the Successful General Practice Owner. So if you enter that group, you will be able to get a longer description of the models, because you know, the narration of each one might take 10 or 15 minutes if we were to spend of each one, and we don't have that time. So we're going to give you an overview right now. So first of all, there's the traditional model. The traditional model in the old days, the GP or the clinician often smoked with the patient present. That's an old way of doing things, and that might be something that you've considered. You know, we'll consult individually with each patient, and maybe we'll do it while they're here for something else, and maybe you do that already with flu vaccination. I would strongly suggest in this situation that doesn't meet the three requirements. So does it meet the safety aspect? Well, maybe not, because if they're there for something else and we take our eye off the ball, we'll be thinking about getting them a COVID vaccine when actually we should have been dealing with what they were there for. Does it meet the fast and volume requirement? No. About doing this slow, normal model that you've done as if you were normally consulting. This is one of those areas where I would recommend that you potentially step away from doing this. I'll just refer you to the workbook for something you can do with your team later. We're going to be talking about 4 models here. And what I'd like to encourage you is you go through the models with these different factors here, and actually workshop your pros and cons for each of the models with your team, because it's important we take our team on the journey. But we'll keep going back to the models. So the next model is one where the patient moves and the vaccinator is stationary. So we've done our modeling based on what we affectionately call jabbers, people putting the needle in the arm, and we've based it on 2 jabbers at a time. In this model, which you could call a room model or a cubicle model, there are individual vaccination stations, and in the vaccination stations, there's the jabber, there might be an admin, etc. And so with this model, you're looking at about between 2 jabbers, an output of about 40 per hour. And so does that meet safe? Yes. Does it meet fast? Yes. Viability. Well, the viability is an issue here, because to achieve our definition of break even, and to remind you, our definition of break even is cost plus 50%. To meet that, you're going to have to surpass 80% capacity usage. Now, the issue with capacity usage, so using up 80% of your slots, is that there are multiple factors in the COVID vaccination process that are completely out of your control. So filling your clinics is potentially partially out of your control based on how many people are doing the vaccination. So we know practices will be doing it. We know states are gearing up to do mass COVID vaccination hubs. We also know pharmacies are going to be doing it. So there are a lot of potential competing locations people can go to for vaccination. And if those are competing with us, it will put pressure on our ability to fill the capacity. Plus, if the vaccines don't arrive or there are supply constraints, which we've just seen in the last couple of weeks that those have arisen, then it could put us at undue financial risk. So whilst this model is good, you need to be confident that you hit 80% plus usage and booking and filling up for it to be financially viable. The next model is here, and that is where everything else moves. So this we call the grid model. And the grid model is suitable for potentially larger clinics, larger spaces, maybe places where you've hired a public space. Here we're vaccinating in groups of 25. So there are 25 people in a grid formation. The vaccinators move, the patients are sedentary during the vaccination process. This works really well where you've got good vaccine supply, you've got a large space, and it will require larger resources. This can put through about between 2 jabbers, about 100 people an hour. So you could get up to 100 people an hour through with this. And so this does tick all the boxes, but it relies on really good vaccine supply and really good space in order for you to be able to deliver. So that is the grid model. And I'll just remind you, so we've got traditional, we don't recommend. The room or cubicle is 40 per hour. And then you've got the grid, which could go 100 per hour. But you're relying a lot on external parties for that to work as well. Then we have what we've affectionately named the love child of the grid and the cubicle. And we've called it the grubicle. And the grubicle is where we've settled as probably being the most suitable model for most people, because it eliminates risk to significantly lower than the other two models. It allows the maximum chance of making a decent financial return. And we think this model works particularly well. And the grubicle, it works at a rate of 60 per hour. So this is 5 people being vaccinated by 2 immunizers at once. And so you're getting 5 people every 5 minutes. So this model works particularly well with the modeling we've done. And it doesn't really matter who the jabbers are, whether they're doctors or nurses. Your question, which came in the chat earlier, was, what do we do about billing and who do we bill to? So this is one where you can go really, really, really simple. And you could initially, just to get things smooth, most of you will be doctor-owned practices. So you can nominate a practice principal to be the supervisor for the purposes of billing. You bill fully to that person, and that just simplifies the whole process, and you pay your jabbers an hourly rate. Once you've smoothed out the unexpecteds that will become clear once you've actually started, then you can pass it on to the rest of your team. Now, with this, the financial modeling indicates that we can achieve the break even, and reminder, our definition of break even is cost plus 50%. We can achieve that at somewhere between 45 and 65% usage of our capacity. So we only need to be between 45 and 65% full to achieve our definition of break even, which is cost plus 50%. So this is a model that we strongly recommend. The beauty of this model is that if it doesn't go well for you, you've got a low chance of losing money and you can stay at scale down quickly. It can be run really lean without excess, without queue management, parking management, really simplified. And your data entry can be done by a single person using the stream deck that we talk about in the checklist that we've given. It becomes really, really simple and maximizes your chance of success. So the grubicle is where we would recommend that. Many of our members that we've spoken to and other practice owners we've spoken to have talked about communal vaccination. It works really well. People are in a party spirit. It's a good mood. There's music, there's balloons, there's just a really good atmosphere. It works well. So that is the grubicle model. Now, for this to all work, for you to get the success, your definition of success, we need to unshackle. And we need to unshackle from conventional thought. So what do we mean by that? So our previous thinking, so for example, the flu clinic, we can just consent them while they're there, we can run it like a flu clinic. That's probably not going to work very well here, especially given the constraints with regards to the funding that's available. So we need to make the funding work for us. Our best modeling, it suggests out of hours. And you can, even if you've only got 50 vaccines you've been given, that's perfect. You can start at a slow rate, iron out the kinks, and when the vaccine supply ramps up, you'll be able to go faster and you'll be able to go further because you've tested it out at a lower volume. So some people will have got 50 or 100 vaccines and thought, we'll just do what we've always done. This is the time to actually get your planning right and get your test runs right, so that when you're needed to scale, you can. So with regards to unshackling, we need to have everyone pre-consented. Todd talked about red, orange, green right at the top. The reds, ignore. The orange, we need to push them to another path. And everyone there should be pre-consented digitally before they even come. And I'm sure Marcus and the team can talk about the technology to do that. It should be run lean. And all of them should have at least 2 jabbers And you can reliably achieve 60 an hour, and you could get up to 300 in a 5-hour stint when you have that vaccine supply available. The reality is, if we're not willing to think in a different way, we won't get the results we want. What we know, Todd talked to you about a few stories of people that we've worked with over the last few years. And he showed you the model at the beginning. The point of showing you the model is to show you the way that you need to think and bring that thinking to vaccination. So vaccination is quite different and will require different thought to make it successful. And that's the key ingredient you need to give, the different thinking, and understanding that with this modeling, what's possible will help you, just like the Roger Bannister picture, achieve a result you may not have thought was imaginable before. So our modeling shows that with the Grubical, 45 to 65% capacity usage can get you the result that we're recommending as a minimum break even, which is cost plus 50% margin. Okay, we'll keep moving. So where to next? What we talked about at the beginning is that this work that we've done today, we've done about 250 hours of work in the background of thinking. We've then pushed that into a 5-hour event we ran a few weeks ago, and now we've condensed it into about 45 to 50 minutes today. I'm thinking that after this, you'd probably appreciate a bit more depth, and so that you can really plan out how COVID vaccination works well for you. The event we ran recently, we thought it would be useful to make the recordings available to you. So if you just give me a yes in the chat, if that's something you'd like access to, then I'll know that that's the right thing that you're looking for. Excellent. So what we've done is we've taken the recording. It was an event we ran, and it was 397 for the day. Really well received. People came out much clearer on what they wanted to do. What we've done is we've reduced that to 147 for you. Todd talked to you earlier about people who take action. We like people who take action. If you can open this link for me, then I'm going to give you a little gift. What we're going to do is for people who've attended this HealthEngine event today, we're going to give you a further $50 off if you take action today. And it's pretty simple. There's a special code that's on the screen there, HE March 21. If you enter that, it will take a further $50 off, which will be $97. And what we've done, because if you're willing to take action on that, we're going to organize for you a complimentary practice health check where we look at those areas of strategy, recruiting, and leadership to see where you're at. It's a quick 15-minute call, and it will just help you benchmark against where we recommend you should be and give you a really clear picture of where you need to be focusing to get progress for your practice. So have that link, use the code, you'll get access to that recording for $97. It will make it really much easier for you to go in depth into what we talked about today. I'm going to stop there, and we can probably start to go to some questions now.
Thanks, Sachin. Look, I'm sure everybody will appreciate that whilst we're a little bit short on time, that there's a lot of material there. And I think, I think most of you will agree that whilst there's a lot of material here, none of this, sort of is locked in stone. There's a lot of moving parts. And I think one of the things that I wanted to sort of raise as maybe a first question whilst people are perhaps typing in some of their questions into the Q&A is obviously, things are moving quite quickly. We don't know when we're exactly going to get vaccine and how much and all that sort of stuff. How do we modify some of these models that you're talking about to accommodate for the fact that things are changing so quickly? Because tech, no matter which operating model you use, tech can help enable it. But and we can talk to you about that at HealthEngine. But I think ultimately practices need to decide for themselves what's suitable in terms of their infrastructure and levels of risk that they're willing to take and all these sorts of things. How do you recommend that people adopt a model that will scale or be able to cater to some of the changes in the environment?
Yeah, so I'll start and then Todd will finish, because otherwise he'll start and I never get to finish. I think the key here is going to be that you need to have your team on board, because you're going to need to be able to pivot. And we've all done a lot of pivoting over the last year. You're going to need your team on board. And if you can't have them really deeply involved, it's going to be difficult to achieve the changes that are required. The other thing is that the government have already told us, told the media at the weekend, that they're only going to give more vaccine to those that use up what's given. So that thing of let me stock it up until I've got enough and then go is probably not a goer. So Todd, you've got a really good way to go about this at the outset, just to make sure you can test processes and then ramp up as required. So I might let you add in there.
Thank you, Sachin. So yeah, I think the first answer to that question, Marcus, is the elegance of the traffic lights is the reds probably aren't going to change no matter what structural, whatever changes by the federal government, but they might just come around as they see people going in and getting it, no harm. And then you're likely to see things like, travel and certain job restrictions that relate to people that have not had the vaccine. So I'm sure that those people that are red will become orange if we just leave them alone and just say, we're here for you when you're ready. But whatever happens with the tech stack, or whatever happens with the government rules, it just shifts the audience between green and orange is what I'd suggest. So it might mean that there's a bigger audience that require a consult beforehand. So that's about making sure that you build some capacity around that. But I'd strongly encourage you to have those as single point consults. So they should be brief and focused around one particular problem, and ideally direct people to watch some content you put together before you do it that addresses those areas that you're talking about. So this is a really good place to build some scalable approaches to common problems. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, when people are getting smaller amounts, the worst thing people have said are, I would just do it like we do the flu, we'll do a few through the week. Don't do that at all. Plan on delivering it at the time that you were originally planning to deliver it, and run a 25% speed run through, and do it the first time around with everybody in your practice. That is 1B. So just say, and everybody in your practice is 1B, but we're saying that if you don't have, say you get 50 and you've got more than 50 people in the practice, that's okay. You do them in 2 tiers. If you've got less than 50 in your clinic, you just say to them, who's in your extended family that does qualify as part of 1B? Let's get them in as part of the first run through. And you're just doing a kind of test under friendly fire to see how you go with all the systems and processes, but make them book through the tech stack that you'd use externally. And then as it ramps up, so you're probably going to run 3 sessions, 25, 50, 75%, and then I'd run a full bore session after you've done that. That's probably about when you're going to get the full amount coming back to you, but you're going to have the benefit of people that experience the whole process. So run it the right way, just at a slower speed. And ideally the owners that are also GPs should be involved at this stage, because these early models aren't financially viable. So you're probably going to have a different agreement for those, or have an owner in there. Does that make sense? We'll get some yeses in the Q&A.
Yep. Absolutely. Look, guys, we've come to time, and look, as I said, I think we could have a conversation into the early hours in the morning, based on the sort of number of questions that we're getting. I just want to reiterate to those people who have joined that we've actually got, sort of a broad scope with this particular webinar. Some of you who might have attended thinking that you were going to get a sort of discussion around how HealthEngine is going to work with COVID vaccine and so on. That wasn't really the intent of this session. It was really more just to give everybody a sense of what could be done and things to be thinking about, and how you might want to set up your practice. And then, of course, then HealthEngine can come and talk to you specifically about what setup you have and how the tech can actually enable the things that you want to do to meet your definition of success. I think it was really important for Todd and Sachin to actually talk about the high level stuff, which is, I know it sounded a little bit sort of like, esoteric at the beginning, but it was really actually important to set it up so that the foundations of why you're doing this is really set, and how you determine your model. And then we can follow up, and we will with further webinars. And if you're already a HealthEngine customer, you can feel free to just speak to our team, and they'll actually talk to you about how we might be able to help you. But certainly, wanted to firstly thank you, Todd and Sachin, for spending the time to actually give us, a brain dump of a huge amount of IP that you've generated, and the generosity that you've expressed in, being able to share some of that, with our attendees. Obviously, it's not the end. There'll be lots of new stuff, and we'll look forward to seeing seeing some of the videos that you post, that you generously post to the community in any case, you know, to help us keep ahead of how we should be thinking about stuff. And look, those of you who are interested in the Scale My Clinic stuff, please feel free to reach out to them. They're great guys, and you know, I think you'll get a lot of value from being associated with them. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you at the next webinar. We'll speak soon. Thank you.
Cheers.
See you later.